chat if you can say in the chat if you are happy with it being fully recorded or if you wanted to stop after the presentations so the discussion can be held in a more private space. My name is Sameh Knisha and I'm the head of training and learning at the Women's Budget Group, and I focus more on the international work that we do. Please join me. Let me introduce you to our director, Marianne Stephenson. Marianne has been active in the Women's Budget Group for over 20 years and was appointed as its first director in 2017. Prior to this role, she was a freelance consultant specializing in women's equality and human rights and has been director of the Fawcett Society and a commissioner on the Women's National Commission. She's a trustee of Coventry Rape and Sexual Abuse Center and of Just Fair. Please, Marianne, can you tell us a bit about what we do at the Women's Budget Group?
Thank you, Sameh. Thank you very much. And thank you all very much for coming. I'm so excited about this event. I can't tell you. There's nothing I like more than hearing the different experiences from people around the world. So let me just share my screen with you because I've got a presentation. And can everybody see that? Excellent. I hope so. Nobody's saying no. So to start off with, who we are at the Women's Budget Group, we are a network of academics, people from civil society, NGOs, trade unions, and other members of the public. We analyse the budget every year, but we also put forward policies for a more kind of gender equal future. We work to build the capacity of women and women's groups to take part in economic debate, both in the UK and around the world. Most of you here will know what gender responsive budgeting is because you're all coming as sort of practitioners or people who are involved in some way, but just I always think it's really important to emphasize it's not about a special budget for women, and we're not just looking at spending that's aimed at women, particular spending on women's programs. It's really more of an analysis of how all areas of spending affect men and women differently, who's able to access services, who pays for what, and so on. What impact does that have? And I think the first and most important thing to say is in the UK at the moment, this does not happen. The government does not carry out, or certainly it does not publish, we have no evidence what it does, a systematic analysis of the gendered impact of their policies. You sometimes get some small analysis of some tax changes, but the quality of the analysis is very poor. So it will say, for example, we're cutting tax on income from savings and investments. This will affect all people with savings and investments equally, without any analysis of who has savings and investments, so who would benefit from that tax cut. So what I'm going to talk about now is what we do at the Women's Budget Group rather than what happens at the UK government level, because really there isn't the depth of analysis there ought to be. And I wanted to start with this diagram because this is where we start, which is at the Women's Budget Group, we've always argued that unpaid work, particularly care work in the UK, is at the heart of women's economic inequality, because women do 60% more unpaid work than men, most of which is care work or work associated with care. We have less time for paid work, which means we earn less, we own less, we're more likely to be poor, we're less likely to be active in politics and public life. So policy decisions are made that don't take our needs into account. And this inequality intersects with other forms of inequality to do with class, with race, with disability, and so on. But also specifically for women, it intersects with violence against women and girls. And we've done several pieces of work at the Women's Budget Group about the relationship between women's economic situation and violence against women and girls. So I wanted to talk first about some of the principles of the analysis that we do, and then talk a little bit about some of the types of work we do. So first of all, we think it's very important that when you're looking at the impact of policies, you look at the impact on individuals as well as households. So such analysis that the government does do is often carried out at the household level. So it will say, you know, this is what the policy will mean for richer households or poorer households. But we know that income isn't shared equally within households, and interests within households may differ. So if you're giving money to a decision maker in the household, the decisions they make about how that money is spent may not be meeting the needs of all the other household members. And that also policy can affect decision-making power within households. So we also know that how much money people bring into the household can affect their power and decisions about how money is spent. The next point that we always stress is that it's important to look at the impact of policies over a lifetime, not just the immediate impact. This is because you can have a policy that in the short term might seem to benefit women, but in the longer term can make things much harder. As an example of this is the UK pension system, where there was quite a long period where women were able to pay lower levels of national insurance contributions. If they were married, they could pay what was called the married woman's stamp, and this was lower than other people. But it also entitled them to a lower level of state pension in old age. So in the short term, they might be better off because they were paying lower national insurance, but in the long term, they were poorer because of their lower pensions. We also talk, and this is not surprising because of the centrality of care in our work, about the impact that policy decisions will have on the care economy. So one of the things that we recognise is that care is a fundamental part of human life. Everybody needs care at some point in their lives. Most of us will provide care to somebody at some point in our lives. And so if you're looking at policies, you have to look at the impacts those have on unpaid work, including care, as well as paid work. And finally, we think it's very important to take an intersectional approach, so to look at the differences between different groups of women and men. So looking, for example, and I'll talk about this in a minute, about the difference that policies might have on Black or Asian women in the UK compared to white women. The differences that policies might have on disabled women compared to non-disabled women. And for us, it's always important to focus on the least advantaged. So I wanted to talk briefly about some of the types of work that we do. And I'll start with the budget because that's what we're best known for. So there's normally two what are called fiscal events a year. Sometimes the budget's in the spring, sometimes it's in the autumn. There's all sorts of complexities about that, but we respond to both of them each year. We start well in advance of the budget, so we produce a series of pre-budget briefings that set out what we think the current issues are and what we would like to see the government doing. And then we work with partner organisations to try and work out what we think is going to be in the budget. In the UK, there isn't much of there's no sort of pre-budget scrutiny. There's no draft budget that's published and discussed. Everything's announced on budget day. But in actual fact, pretty much everything is leaked to the newspapers in advance. So there's always various rumours. And quite often the Treasury will leak a story to test it, to see what the public response is. And if the response is bad, it might not go in the budget. If the response seems to be good, it might. So we're preparing well in advance for our budget response and working out what our lines would be based on what we think is going to be in the budget. On the day, we live tweet, we send messages to journalists and political contacts, and then we do an immediate response on the day and a more detailed response normally within the week. And we have a small staff team, so a lot of the work is carried out by members on a pro bono basis, academics, again, people from other civil society groups or trade unions, and they might contribute to different sections depending on their areas of expertise. But as well as the budget response, we also do other sorts of reports. So, for example, we do cumulative impact analysis. So this is looking at the impact of multiple policies over a period of time. This particular report looked at the impact of austerity policies from 2010 onwards, both changes to tax and social security, but also spending on public services. And we did a distribution analysis And we also did some qualitative research in 2 English cities, in Manchester and Coventry. And we analysed the results by gender, class and race, and a separate report on disability. And this was a joint project with an organisation called the Runnymede Trust, which is a race equality think tank, and 2 local organisations. We're currently updating this work, so we're revisiting those findings to look at 2010 projected forward to 2027. The other thing we do is analysis of particular issues or a particular situation. So I've picked COVID, which was a major focus for our work from March 2020 onwards. We produced a large number of reports and briefings, responded to inquiries. Every time the government changed their response to COVID and the support that they were giving to households and businesses, we published an analysis. We did polling with other women's organisations on how the pandemic and its response was affecting women, and we worked in partnership with academic researchers, particularly looking at the impact of the pandemic on working class women. Other work we do is much broader. So a few years ago, we ran a commission on a gender equal economy that was really looking at the economy as a whole. So what were the sort of policies, not just the kind of detail of tax and benefits, but how should the economy be structured? What should our tax system be like? You know, a whole range of different areas. And we brought together a commission of experts who provided really brilliant expertise. We collected papers, we commissioned papers, we had various discussions and came up with a final set of 8 recommendations. More recently, we did work with the Women's Environmental Network on a feminist Green New Deal, because we recognise that climate change will have a gendered impact, as will the policies to mitigate and respond to climate change. But those impacts are very rarely considered. And if you don't consider them, first of all, you can end up with policies that don't work, but you can also end up with policies that actually worsen gender and other forms of inequalities. So again, with that, we had a series of reports and then a final report at the end. But it's not just about the research. One of our main things is about actually having an impact. So we do a lot of work to influence parliamentarians. We give evidence to parliamentary select committees and all party groups. We draft questions for parliamentarians to ask in Parliament. We organise seminars in Parliament for MPs and peers, members of the House of Lords and other women's organisations. We've provided training for researchers and assistants. So we really try and turn all our analysis into something that will influence political debate. And finally, we have the training and learning team, which Samra heads up very ably, and that is both international work, but also work at a local level. We have a project called the Local Data Project, which is about helping women in the UK find, analyse and use local data. And this is about democratising access to data, but it's also a recognition as part of our strategy that any sort of change requires political will, and part of creating political will is by public pressure, by people who've got the capacity to engage and know what they're talking about. So we do a lot of work in helping that happen. And this is a cartoon. We had a cartoonist come along to a census day that we organised, run by Liz Hind, who's our senior training officer, who's here today, about how local groups could analyse the data from the census. And we're going to be doing a series of events across the country on that. So that was a very brief overview. All of this information can be found on our website, and we'll share these slides after the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm very biased. I cannot say anything about it. I love the work we do, but maybe later we can talk more about the challenges that we face as an organization that is trying to push for gender responsive budgeting in the UK, and kind of convincing decision makers to do so. Dami, are you ready right now?
Yes.
Cool. The floor is yours. Tell us a bit more about what's happening in Kenya.
Okay, thank you. I hope my background noise won't be a challenge.
No background noise so far.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm not sure why my camera is not turning on, but let me just get into the presentation. My name is Darmi Jatani, as introduced by Salma. Thank you so much for understanding. We are currently on transit, monitoring one of our projects on gender financing, hence the hustle. And we didn't want to miss this opportunity to share, especially given that the UK Women's Budget Group really played a crucial role in kickstarting the organization's commitment towards gender-responsive budgeting and even going beyond and sharing the experiences with others. So I work as the coordinator at Collaborative Center for Gender Development, and I coordinate gender-responsive financing, planning, and research monitoring and evaluation. So today I would like to just start my presentation by giving an overview of what the Kenya's budget cycle, the stages look like. So we start with the budget formulation. Here it's mostly the plannings, and the public also gets at this point to incorporate a lot of their feedback through a process of public participation. And the ministry's departments are able then to consolidate what they presented as a budget estimates, incorporated with the feedback received from the general public. And then this is then taken to the parliament at the national level, and at the county level in Kenya, it goes to the county assemblies for budget approval. And then once the budget is approved, we get into the implementation stage. And during this implementation stage, there's also requirement by the public finance management regulations that each department gives quarterly updates on how they get to implement their budget. And at the end of the financial year, we have the evaluation or the audit, and this is where the Auditor General gets to audit how resources were spent in that particular year. And this again is submitted to the Parliament and the County Assembly for discussion. And I'm just giving this so that even as I move into the agenda setting and explaining the progress made, we are able to understand how the Kenyan context looks like. So even in terms of policies and legislation, they follow a very similar cycle where the public is given the draft policy or law or regulation. Then there's the public participation. Then the same is taken to the parliament or the county assembly for approval. Then it becomes a law. So that's how both budgeting and government policy works in Kenya. Now coming to gender responsive budgeting, one of the key findings from our studies and analysis of Kenya's progress in gender responsive budgeting is the existing legal and institutional framework provides a good foundation for gender responsive budgeting. And we know government spending is informed by a certain policy. So having this ingrained in the existing laws and the institutional frameworks serves even as an opportunity to advance our recommendations when it comes to gender responsive budgeting. And there's a joke in this country that goes, we have a law or some institution for everything that comes up, but the challenge always comes in when it comes to the implementation. But in terms of the legal and institutional framework, there's been a lot done in terms of gender responsive budgeting. And again, when you look at the institutions, we have the State Department for Gender, and we also have NGEK, which is National Gender Equality Commission, National Gender and Equality Commission. And these institutions have been mandated to mainstream gender and give recommendations and feedback to the different ministries and state departments so that they're also able to streamline their policies and their spending to be more gender responsive. And this is just to say that in the three arms of government, recently there was one of the achievements in terms of the institutions that are also coming on board to accept the recommendations and the guidance offered by these two state departments. And we saw the Judiciary Service Commission establishing a unit of its own in order to adhere to the 2/3 gender rule and ensure that women have equal employment opportunities in the judiciary. So this is just to show that there are these key two institutions that have been mandated to support in gender mainstreaming and also promotion of gender responsive budgeting. But we've seen also other arms of government establish their own offices in order to increase the quick uptake of the recommendations given. Then the country's Vision 2030, we are 6 years away from 2030. So there is a lot of commitments towards gender mainstreaming that is also in the government's blueprint. And we've seen a lot of affirmative action funds and initiatives trying to look at what challenges are facing women, what challenges are facing men. So even in terms of the government's response, by coming up with initiatives, we've seen several of these. And while at this point, I think I can bring out one of the challenges, again, these initiatives has brought, is that over time, we do not see a transition from initiatives to gender responsive budgeting. So every now and then when a challenge comes up, instead of mainstreaming it into the budget and allocating resources to address, a new affirmative action fund is created or an initiative. And this seems to overtake our advocacy for gender responsive budgeting, instead of just picking on selective initiatives and calling that gender responsive budgeting. So that now goes ahead to show that yes, the existing laws and the institutional frameworks provide the foundation, but the specific, the Public Finance Management Act, which is the specific one that now guides on the making of the budget, lacks a lot of specificity in terms of gender responsive budgeting, and this then makes the budget mostly be gender neutral, despite having it as a commitment and written in laws that budgets should be gender responsive. Again, Kenya uses some sort of program-based budgeting, and it also has this medium-term expenditure framework. And we've seen that this kind of planning has also helped us advocate for gender-responsive budgeting, because each program is expected to have some sort of framework in showing what are the indicators, who are the beneficiaries. So this again has helped in being able to transform the budget to be more gender-responsive. And the public perception of gender responsive budgeting in Kenya, unfortunately, it's mostly seen as a women empowerment initiatives. And this, as Collaborative Center for Gender Development, we've seen it work against us, because it always comes out as a fight between men and women. And I think the previous presenter made it very clear that gender responsive budgeting isn't, separate budget for men and women. It's supposed to integrate the needs of both genders into one budget. So this perception has also somewhat contributed to the slow acceptance of gender responsive budgeting. And because the perception of gender responsive budgeting is a few initiatives for women, then this means even the progress made in gender responsive budgeting, the scope is so narrow, only to specific sectors that they call the women's sectors. We know the social protection, and we've only seen gender responsive initiatives, being implemented in specific sectors and leaving crucial sectors such as energy, health, and so forth. And this, again, I'll just like to point out the Kenya's budget policy statement of 2023 actually had a whole section on the women agenda, further again perpetrating the fact that we need to have this separate budget for women, instead of just highlighting the challenges that both women and men face, so that is again incorporated into the overall government spending. And again, there is the implicit bias in policy, because gender is always a secondary effect. And as we've seen, a lot of the times it's more, meeting targets or ticking the box as a result of funding received. So gender is always a secondary thought. And because of this, there's that implicit bias in policy. And this is just to say that they do not wake up to say we would marginalize one group in terms of policy or public spending, but because gender is never thought of, then there is that overall implicit bias in policy. And because these policies again direct the government spending, then the spending again ends up being biased in that aspect as well. When you look at the key findings from the Kenyan context, we have 10 sectors, and each of those 10 sectors have several state departments and ministries, some as high as 12, others as high as 18 state departments under one sector. And out of that, only 8 state departments have gender-specific expenditures targeting women. None of them have specific expenditures targeting men. So again, just to further elaborate on how GRB is seen as a women's budget in Kenya. And again, the 2 state departments that have been mandated to be in charge of gender mainstreaming seem to be the only 2 ones that had the highest and the most sensitive, gender sensitive allocations. So, and therefore, this is just to go again in our advocacy, we really push for mainstreaming of gender issues so that it goes beyond these 8 state departments to all government MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies. And this spending roughly is only 11% of the total spending of the government. So still to show that Kenya has, in terms of implementation and spending, we still have a long way to go because we still spend, majority of our expenditure is not gender responsive, only 11%. And again, from my first introduction, you could tell that there is focus on legislation and policies. But in terms of now matching the policies and the laws with adequate budgetary allocation is where they somewhat always tend to draw the line. But all is not lost. Recently, the government, through the National Gender and Equality Commission, started having this sort of a technical working group on gender responsive budgeting. And what this has done is it has brought people like us who have the expertise into the rooms with governments, and we've been able to also offer our expertise and understanding of gender analysis and how the same can be upscaled across all ministries in the government. Again, another key achievement, I think, is the time use surveys. Definitely, it's a known fact that women spend more time on unpaid care work across the globe. And definitely, statistics have shown that this burden is even worse in developing countries such as Kenya. So having no time use surveys, again, was a challenge in now advocating for, you need to invest in healthcare, you need to invest in education, because women spend a lot of time on this unpaid care work and improving education and health. But no, we didn't have data to back up what we were saying or in what we were trying to advocate for. And, small organizations, we really don't have that capacity to carry out a nationwide time use surveys, but we've seen now the government start publish data on time use surveys. So this then means we'll be using their own evidence in advocating for gender responsive budgeting. And that is such a good win, because we wouldn't be told as prior that civil society organizations use a lot of propaganda without facts in advocating for issues they are passionate about. We also have the men and women fact sheets, and this again provides statistics on the same, thereby giving this opportunity to upscale gender responsive budgeting. We also have the Kenya Demographic Health Survey. We call it generally KDHS. And when you look at the most recent one, which is the 2022 one, then you can see a lot of gender disaggregated data. And even in the forward and introduction, you can see the statement and the commitment by the government to continue publishing this data in a disaggregated form in order to allow for planning and also for budgetary allocations. So as much as there is also the gloom side in that it's only a little share of the budget that is gender responsive, there is a lot of advancement and opportunities in the past recent years that we feel that collectively will end up building a better case for gender responsive budgeting. Okay, now coming to the challenges and lessons. Obviously, the lack of gender disaggregated data has been such a major challenge in even proving the need for gender responsive budgeting. And this again has made it even hard in terms of trying to measure the impact of government spending. And there is generally that lack of acknowledgement for the inequalities that exist in government spending. So now proving that in order to advocate for gender responsive budgeting has been a challenge, given that there was a lack of data. But as I mentioned in the achievements and opportunities, we've seen governments start producing data that has disaggregated data, so that now will again help in that. And also I mentioned that we have the program-based budget. The way it is structured, it really
We are losing you, I think. Is it just me or it's the network?
A certain line item, the police, for a moment. Am I audible now?
Now, yes, but we lost you for like the last minute or so.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So I was on the point on the lack of gender disaggregated data, and I mentioned that being a big challenge in even, building a case for gender responsive budgeting. But again, I think I might be showing too much gratitude, but we were taken through a lot of gender responsive budgeting approaches by the Women's Budget Group, and we've been able to, mix these approaches. Where one fails, we try to substitute with an element of the other and be able to advocate despite not having full data. Again, as civil society organizations and private institutions working in Kenya, there is a lot of focus on outcome harvesting immediately by donors. So therefore, trying to build a case and do gender responsive budgeting slowly and over time through influencing social attitudes and perspectives towards gender responsive budgeting has also been inhibited by that focus on outcome harvesting too soon, sometimes as soon as 2 years. That again becomes a challenge. The challenge and as well a lesson is we were working in silo. Most of the most of the civil society organizations advocating for gender responsive budgeting, working in silos. And that again presented a challenge because this group will be advocating for gender responsive budgeting in the sectors that they work in, and others are advocating for the other sectors that they work in, and therefore it's a lot of competing priorities when it comes to the proposals that we make. Therefore, again, this has led to the conception of the Kenya Gender Budget Network, which now brings together all these organizations advocating for gender responsive budgeting. And we've seen there is some gaining of traction. Even the call to sit in the technical working group for gender responsive budgeting was as a result of this now speaking in one voice. So that was still a challenge, but also a lesson that we've learned. And to conclude, Sama, I hope I still have some minutes. To conclude, I'd just like to share one of our interventions in terms of Kenya. There is the sanitary towel program that is given to school-going girls in Kenya. And over time, the education sector in Kenya has been one of the best performing, and that is the only sector where the gender gap has been closed. And girls now, the retention rate even in school is almost at 100%. And we've also seen teenage pregnancy policies and return back to school policies where girls are given a second chance even after teenage pregnancy to come back to school. And I think that has been such a driving factor for us as people in this space, because we've seen where the budget is gender responsive, like in the education sector, we have seen the results. Gender gaps have been closed, and again, building that case, educated mothers become, better citizens, and even in taking care of their children, and the outcomes of even their children in terms of education outcomes tends to improve. And with that, Sama, thank you so much, but I'll be on the call for any questions. I'll also be in the chat just responding to any question that comes up. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Dani, for this very inspiring presentation. And it's impressive how many initiatives are happening in Kenya and how many mechanisms are there, even if they are not satisfying for civil society, but it's more than in so many other countries, for example. And I'm so impressed by the fact that civil society got together to push for gender responsive budgeting in Kenya. And I think at the Women's Budget Group, we look very much forward to continue our collaboration. Having Olia speak now until we sort out your presentation, if that's fine. Hello.
I'm here to step in Michaela's shoes, if that's okay with her, because of the time limitations that she mentioned.
I'll email her. I'll introduce you and email her.
Sam, I think you're on mute. The tech gods today.
Apologies. Thank you so much for stepping in, Olia. We are very, very happy to have you here. And I'm so happy that we are continuing collaboration after the Cyprus platform conference that we will talk about in a bit. So Olia has been working with UN Women since 2015, and she's now working for UN Women Europe and Central Asia, managing the introduction and implementation of gender-responsive budgeting across all levels of government, integrating gender perspectives into policy planning, and fostering women's economic empowerment through collaboration with women's civil society organizations. With over 15 years of experience in various UN agencies, including UNOPS and WHO, Olia has successfully managed complex projects and forged strong partnerships with diverse stakeholders across multiple sectors, as well as with women CSOs. This joint work and implemented initiatives advance the implementation of gender-responsive budgeting in Serbia. The achieved results put Serbia among the group of 7 European countries that implement successfully GRB, as recognized in the SDG 5C1 report. So, Olia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation, and it's really a great opportunity to discuss with you the GRB implementation in the Western Balkans and ECA region of UN Women. I will try to be brief and keep it under 10 minutes, which will be a bit of a challenge. But I hope that for starters, my presentation will work. Oh, it's not here. Sorry, here it is. So do you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I will, as I said, discuss now briefly the how UN Women is approaching the GRB work in Europe, in Western Balkans and Central Asia region. And as you can see for this slide, there is we have developed our work in sort of 5 pillars, which correspond to the budget cycle that was previously mentioned by the colleague from Kenya. So we are working in the entire budget cycle from policy planning, budgeting, budget execution, reporting and monitoring, but also we are trying to work more and more with the evaluation and independent bodies and also parliament oversight, and with the and to work more on the participatory approaches and role of the women and women CSOs in GRB implementation. In terms of our approach, we are working towards increasing the awareness, capacities and political will that is necessary to integrate gender equality into financing, and that is something that it was also mentioned previously. We are working towards the strengthening capacity of institutions to design sectoral strategies, plans, to monitor budget execution, and to provide services that are free from discrimination and in line with the women's specific needs. This work is grounded in the strategic coordination and partnership, and we are really working a lot of knowledge sharing and cross-country exchange of experiences, especially in these countries where UN Women has a presence. In terms of our support in Europe and Central Asia, we have been supporting various countries for more than 10 years now. And currently we are working in Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Serbia, and Kosovo, Turkey, Georgia, Tajikistan, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Uzbekistan. And I'm really happy to share how the things are progressing in this region, especially because it's somehow on the outskirts and not clearly visible by the outsiders, but I will focus more on Serbia. In terms of main objectives that we are trying to push in each and every country, it's providing support to the Ministries of Finance to strengthen legal framework on GRB. And we have seen some really good progress here with GRB being put as an obligation in the budget system law in Albania, in Serbia, in North Macedonia, at Kosovo, and in other countries. We have also worked on mainstreaming gender in sectoral strategies and national and local action plan by using GRB to cost and support budgetary allocation in all of the countries that we are working for. We are working towards increasing the investments on gender equality and close gender gaps, as well as on increase the transparency and accountability. And we increase capacities of, we work on increasing the capacities of public officials. And this approach actually is multifaceted, since we are working on trainings and mentoring, but also on producing gender analysis and manuals for GRB implementation at national, local level. But we are also pushing for working with the national bodies that are in charge of civil servants capacity development. And this is something that we managed to secure in Albania, in North Macedonia, and in Serbia, which we find that is very crucial for sustainability of capacity development. Also, we are working towards the participatory processes, especially in Albania, North Macedonia, and Georgia, and facilitate also using GRB to facilitate the SDG implementation. So these are some focuses that we are having in this region. However, this translates to more or less extent to Serbia also. So I will move now to Serbia for the purposes of time. Oh no, before that, just to see the array of partners that we are having in this process. As you can see, it's really wide. So our main partners are the Ministries of Finance and national gender equality mechanisms and machinery across the countries. But of course, we are also working with the aligned ministries at the national level, with the state statistical offices to tackle this challenge of lack of sex disaggregated data that the colleague from Kenya was speaking about. Also with parliamentary commissions and parliamentary institutes in countries where they are established. But also what we are engaging more and more in recent years is the work with the Supreme Audit Institutions on auditing gender equality and auditing GRB, which proved to be very important for the process and its sustainability. But also with the training institutes, as I mentioned, with the women's NGOs and the women's group on these participatory approaches. And what we also engaged in the last 4 years is working more with media, because we understand that the journalists really lack knowledge on financing, but on financing as a tool to achieve gender equality especially. So we are really looking, working more towards the increasing of their capacities. So this is the approach that we are implementing in all countries where we support GRB implementation. I tend to speak very fast, so Sama, please remind me if I start doing that. So in terms of Serbia's case, this is just a quick snapshot of how it took, because I guess that nobody from the audience knows about GRB in Serbia. So it actually started with piloting in 2008, and it was mainly on the part of the women CSOs and at the provincial level of government, where they piloted some small scale analysis, but also it contributed to the demand for introduction of GRB, which actually happened in 2015. And lucky for us, it really coincided with the introduction and transfer to program budgeting. So from the very beginning of its implementation, it has been regarded as an integral part of program budgeting. And with saying that, I want to stress that it really suffers from all the, should I call it, baby diseases of program budgeting, because it's being introduced for, it's 8 years now, but it's really a process of learning. So in 2015, we have introduced GRB as an obligation in the budget system law, and it specified the gradual introduction of GRB. This is the approach that the Republic of Serbia decided to take. And this deadline for full application was moved from 2020, and we are now in 2025 as the end year, where the budgets of all governmental level, both direct and indirect, are supposed to be gender responsive. In 2016, the law was amended to introduce the obligatory reporting on GRB, although this is something that needs to be improved. And since 2016 until now, we are really pushing for, besides GRB implementation and enlarging the scope of its implementation, on its institutionalization. And key partners here are the State Audit Institution, who is really active in Serbia in this particular area, but also the National Academy for Public Administration that provides this sustainable training options, etc. In 2023, last year, the State Audit Institutions conducted first performance audit on GRB, which really pinpointed the weak spots of its implementation and how it should be improved. So I will speak a bit more about that later on. In terms of legal and strategic framework, GRB is really firmly embedded in our laws and strategies. The first one that came in 2015 is the budget system law. And the GRB represents the introduction of gender equality principle in the budget process. And by the definition that was put in the law, it includes budget gender analysis and restructurings of revenues and expenditures to advance gender equality. I must stress that we are still on the expenditure side. We are just pushing and starting to push for the revenue side to be included in the process. And this part of gender analysis is something that we are not seeing systematically implementing, which I will also mention later on. GRB is also embedded in the gender equality law, and it is one of specific measure of the national strategy for gender equality and national action plans. In terms of how it is being implemented in Serbia, as I said, it's an integral part of program budget, and it follows the entire cycle. And at the beginning, we have UN Women has developed some sort of criteria for selection of budget objectives because of this gradual nature, which implied that it is implemented in 1 year in one budget program, all its activities and all its indicators, and that at least that was the intention of the Ministry of Finance. And all these gradual process is governed by the annual GRB plans and GRB instructions that are being adopted by the Minister of Finance and by the Provincial Secretariat of Finance and heads of finance department at local level. And this is something I think that is peculiar for Serbia, so I will present it in the next slide. As stated in these annual GRB plans, the GRB needs to be integrated in at least one program objective, all connected activities and indicators, and these should expand from year to year. And we see that this process is working very well in some institutions, in some not so much. For example, the Provincial Secretary of Sport has gender mainstream it's their entire budget, and there are some budget users that really did this, but not all of them. And basis for GRB, because we started with somehow top-bottom approach, is the basis for them to define the GRB objectives is the priorities and objectives of the gender equality strategy and national action plan, and gender analysis if they are conducted. So in terms of this annual plan, it is being adopted by the Minister of Finance since 2015, and it specifies the exact budget users that are obliged in that year to introduce GRB, or specifies the obligations for the ones that were already included in the process, how they can expand its application. And the steps are that it needs to link a budget with gender equality strategy, and as a basis for it should be also taking into account the gender analysis when and if they are available. If that is not available, then it was recommended to the budget users to budget in the first year of GRB implementation the gender analysis, and this is something that we did. We saw that some complied with, but some not, of course. And based on this, they defined GRB objectives and indicators. And in terms of GRB and how it is being introduced, there are three manners of its introduction. It's the gender mainstreaming of programs, the specific and special measure or affirmative measure to ensure gender equality that targets mostly women, or introducing segregated indicators in the regular activities that they're doing. And this, what we see from the implementation, this third modality is actually what they use the most, unfortunately, but this is the easiest one, so it's somehow understandable. In terms of number, as Samara mentioned in my introduction, Serbia was, based on the SDG 5C1 report, put in the group of 7 countries that, according to this indicator, implement GRB, along with Albania from the region of the Western Balkans. And so far, we have trained more than 2,500 civil servants at different governmental levels on GRB. And in terms of 2024 budgets, 80 budget users on national and provincial level out of 89 in total complied with the Ministers of Finance GRB plans, meaning that they have at least one budget program that is gender responsive, and these actually encompass more than 120 institutions. We have gender included in 117 budget programs out of 180, so it's about 60% of the entire budget programs that we are having in the budget at the national and local, provincial level. 283 budget programs, and you can see how many indicators. It sounds like much, but as I said, most of these 900 indicators are this sex desegregation, which is important as a first step, but it is not something that we are really trying to push. We are more on the budgeting for transformative actions. And at local level, we have 175 municipalities, around 60% has introduced GRB to some extent. So in terms of how it is being done, we are really pushing for synergetic actions of different budget users so that they do that they work in synchronized manner, and from from their own mandate push for improvement of gender equality. The example of this can be the economic empowerment of women, although this wasn't intentional, just these different institutions are recognizing the strategy for gender equality, and that's why they are doing this. But you can see that they all from their side can support these processes. So, for example, Ministry of Economy and Provincial Secretariat of Economy are providing numerous subsidies that specifically target women's entrepreneurship. The Regional Development Agency on their side is providing counseling for women entrepreneurs on their business development, risk management, etc. Ministry of Environmental Protection is supporting the green entrepreneurship of women. So again, from their mandate, what they can do. And we really see that the important role of Directorate for Public Procurement is due to GRB process actually starting to support higher participation of women, and they have changed the information system that now so they can track the share of women-owned businesses in the public procurement. And I must stress here that they have actually adopted the definition of women-owned business by UN Women, meaning at least 51% of ownership as one of the criteria among the three. I won't go into detail because of the time, but what we see as the challenges, and this is also something that was really highlighted in the state audit institutions performance audit of GRB, is that although the system is in place, it's not really used effectively, and it's been it depends on the capacities of every single budget users and of course their mandate, and there isn't the lack of established system for implementation and financing of gender equality strategy. And what we see as a challenge in GRB implementation, that despite of the instructions of the Ministry of Finance, in many cases, actually the policies and strategies in any area, but also in gender equality, are not really directly linked with the budgets. So this link is something that we are seeing that is missing, and I think that is stalling the process a lot. And we are also trying to push for this more of this transformative intervention than just this gender sensitive ones. Also what we see as a challenge is to include decision makers in GRB processes. So we are mainly working with the people from the finances and for the planning departments and GRB focal points, which we are having in Serbia. But actually you see when the budget gets adopted and it gets to the higher level of decision making, some of the initiatives that we have developed together actually stay out of the budget in the end due to this decision making that is done in the highest level of the government. And also we see that there is a lack of cooperation between different sectors in the ministries, but also in the ministries themselves, which really prevents full effectiveness of GRB implementation and really changing the position of women in a society, because everybody is doing from their own mandate, but there is a lack of cooperation. In some cases there is a cooperation, but it's not in systematically manner implemented. In terms of data and statistics, I might say that Serbia, because the Republic Statistics Office was also mandated to introduce GRB, so through this process they have really enhanced and they're improving each year their statistics, and we have many data disaggregated by sex now, but now we come to another problem. This is the using of gender sensitive and sex disaggregated data. So really the weak part of the GRB, which should be actually the core of it and the basis of it, is this gender analysis. So we are really looking and pushing for increase of capacities of civil servant team performing gender analysis in various areas. Monitoring, evaluation, and reporting is really something that actually program budgeting suffers from, so the GRB as an integral part of it also suffers from, and due to how the system was put in place, we cannot actually see how much money has been spent and allocated to gender equality. So these are I think.
Hello. Oh yeah. I think
this step of decision making at higher level, to ensure that there is a linkages between planning and budgeting and the systematic conduction of gender analysis. We are pushing more towards the transformative GRB interventions. We have developed a monitoring and reporting system that we are now currently looking to pilot with the Ministry of Finance. Also, we are just starting to work on the revenue side of the budget, and also what we are seeing that we are missing is the inclusion of indirect budget users, because with direct budget users we have really good coverage, but in terms of indirect budget users it's not so simple. So this is it from my side. I hope that I wasn't very long, so I will stop sharing. Thank you.
It wasn't. Thank you so much, Oya. This is so eye-opening, and it makes so much difference to have a political will at the country state in order to be able to implement gender responsive budgeting. Regarding Vienna presentation, unfortunately, Michaela does not have a good network, but she's very, very happy for us to share her presentation, and she's very happy to receive questions or requests via email, and we will sort that after the webinar. Thank you so much for joining, Michaela. It's really unfortunate that the network did not work, but hopefully we will talk again and you will get to present the Vienna case soon. We have Mary Pyrgos with us. Mary, are you ready? Can you make a sign while I'm introducing you? Hello, Mary. Okay, I'll introduce her. Maybe she will join us. So Mary Pyrgos comes from Cyprus, and she's a public affairs consultant and a certified trainer on corruption, whistleblowing, lobbying, and gender budgeting. She has an eclectic background and that ranges from physiotherapy to French history and literature, law, environmental auditing, and mediation. She's also a socio-historical researcher and author of several books. One of them is called Patriarchy and Patriarchy. Another one is The Cypriot Woman at a Glance, Anne of Cyprus, and several other researches on violence in the family and the movement against violence in Cyprus. She's also the editor and publisher of the online newspaper I Apopsimas, meaning Our Opinion. Mary founded many non-governmental organizations and was president of a number of them. She's now the coordinator of the Cyprus Gender Budgeting Platform, the funder and the president of the Research Foundation Fimonoi, and the Lobbyists and Public Affairs Association, which are currently running a campaign for zero tolerance on corruption. She's the country editor of Cyprus at the Whistleblowers International Network. And Mary has been instrumental in shaping several anti-corruption and gender equality policies and legislations in Cyprus. I hope that Mary is here with us now.
She's on. Mary, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Mary.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it is really nice to be here with you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present the case study of Cyprus. We haven't been working on gender budgeting for a long time. 2 years ago, gender budgeting in Cyprus was unknown. Nobody knew about it. And we feel that we have done quite a lot in 1 year. So I would like to pass on this experience, because I think it may be important for small states to see how we did it, and maybe it can help them to do it in their countries. Actually, I don't have. Are you going to?
You want me to share your presentation?
Yes, please, Samar.
Yes. Let me, I think this is it. Can you see it?
Yes, so we go up.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Can we have a slide 2, please? Yes.
Can you see it now?
Yes, yes. Is everybody, can everybody see it? Okay.
Yes.
It's still the first slide in the main screen.
The blue one?
Yes, we want slide 2, if we can.
Yeah, I have slide 2 on my screen.
Okay, now, so in 2021, many associations complained that we were not getting enough funds to promote our projects. And at the time, Fimonoi was running 2 projects, one for corruption and one against corruption, and the other one for a project that we wanted to do in the countryside. And for both projects, we received a no, a no answer. There is no budget. There is nothing we can do. So at the same time, we found out that another person who was running a project on corruption got money from the government, but this person was very close to the elite. So we said, okay, we're going to do something about that. So we went and saw the the permanent secretary of the ministry, but he said there was nothing he could do. Therefore, we decided that but during the conversation, he mentioned the Foundation Fimonoi, which is a research institute.
It's still not presentation. Sorry, Mary, I'm so sorry. Sam, it's still quite small. Can you, if you click the button at the top, it should put it into presentation.
I did. It's on presentation mode on my screen. So
That's
I don't know
weird.
what I'm doing wrong.
No, maybe if you zoom in then, maybe that will help for the people that can't see. Sorry for interrupting, Mary.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now? Can I continue? Yes? Okay. So we started research to find out what was the global situation, and then research to find out what international conventions existed in relation to gender budgeting, and they researched on international organizations that supported gender budgeting. I can assure you it was at the time very difficult. We couldn't, there was a lot of information on internet, and we wrote letters, but it was very difficult at the time to find this information. I think the only organization that responded at the time was UK Women's Group, and we're really very grateful because they sent us the first information at the time. And then we can move to the next slide, number 4. And then once we finished this international research, we started researching what exists in Cyprus, and we researched the national commitments of our government. We researched what else existed in Cyprus in relation to gender budgeting. We researched our legislation and to find out whether any articles of our of this legislation prevented us from proceeding with gender budgeting, and they told us that it was fine, so there was no any obstacle. And then we wanted to see what actions were taken by the Commission of Equality and any measures taken for the introduction of gender budgeting resources available for this reform. So we found that, in fact, there was absolutely nothing at the time. Can we move to the next slides? You cannot?
I moved to, it's slide 5 on my screen.
We're now slide 5, I think, yes.
It's not sure. It's still on free for some reason.
So can I continue in any way?
Yes. Now, is it?
It's 3 again.
This is still 3. This is still 3. Kindly go to slide number 5.
It's slide number 5 for me.
Yes.
Yes, now it's number 5. Okay. Once we found out what existed, it was very important for us to find out what this gender budgeting was, because we knew the name, but we had no idea, we had no in-depth knowledge of this gender budgeting. And so we started researching to find out what trainings existed, what module existed, what tool existed. We did a lot of research, and we did a lot of learning. We studied and studied and studied, and almost what was happening in most of the countries they tried to implement it. And then we wanted to find experts, but then again, it was very difficult to identify any experts at the time. So we evaluated all this knowledge that we acquired, and we went back to the Ministry of Finance. And this is number 7. If we can move to the number 7.
Can you see it?
Yes. Through this research, we found out that Cyprus was committed to introduce gender budgeting by a number of conventions. So we took all this with us, and with all the other information that we collected, and we went to the Ministry of Finance. We knew that in 2014, which is the next slide, Sama, in 2014, when there was a reform of the law for public expenses, they organized a seminar, and they included something about gender budgeting, but that was very superficial. Only, they didn't, it was only for very few civil servants, and nothing happened from there. Later, I think they were obliged through these conventions to do something, and they prepared a booklet saying talking about gender mainstreaming, which included a small chapter about gender budgeting. But again, nothing happened. So all this information we collected, and we went back to the Ministry of Finance to discuss the situation. They said no, they wanted more time, they were not ready, and they told us to wait. So we said to them, no, we are not going to wait any longer. We are going to start a campaign, and we want you to do something about it. So at the end of 2022, we started a campaign. So we go to slide number, I think number 10 now.
Can you see it now?
So what we actually did, we prepared a document, and we had a press conference. And of course, what a disappointment. We invited the press, only one TV came and nobody else. So we sent the document to the newspapers, and we started calling some friends, journalists, to see whether they could put it. We had a very limited presentation of what is gender budgeting. But then we realized that probably the reason that they did not present it is because they did not understand what this thing. It was a complete it was completely a new thing for them. So we decided that we had to do something to educate the people even further. And at the same time, we decided to go to do we started lobbying the government. We went to one or two ministries to see what they felt. Actually, we had a meeting with the commissioner, and at the time we asked her whether she would cooperate to organize co-organize an awareness raising seminar. And this seminar actually happened in January 23. At the same time, we went to the parliament, and we wanted to participate in the committee where they discuss the budget, because the budget is discussed in the parliament at the end of the year. But they said to us, no, there are regulations that prevented us from going in, but they allowed us to distribute a leaflet that we prepared to all the members of the committee. So the year finished without much success, and then we came at the beginning of 23. We organized this conference. We can move down to the slide 10. Can we move to slide 10?
Can you see it now?
No.
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 Yes, slide 10. Here we are. Actually, here you can see at the top that was from the press conference we organized then at the parliament, and then that was some photos that we show from the conference that we organized together with the commissioner for the for equality. The conference was very successful. Everybody was wondering what was this gender budgeting. Even women's organizations didn't know about it. So we thought that it was a very successful event, and it was a very good tool to help us move forward. During the conference, we we propose to organize a platform so that we can, all the associations together, we could work on this gender budgeting, and we launched the Cyprus Gender Budgeting Platform at the end of the conference. Now this platform is supported by 5 universities and more than 450 organizations. As soon as the platform was formed, we decided to prepare a plan of action for 23, and amongst the things that we had to we decided to do was to do a very intensive lobbying, to organize a training seminar, an educational seminar, to educate and train the people that were supporting the platform, so that they knew what we were talking about, because we felt that the people that supported us had to speak the same language. And we also decided to organize a European conference because we felt that we wanted to connect with Europe, and we felt that this was a tool that would help us get to know what is happening in Europe and see what help we can get from our European colleagues in order to proceed with more activities in Cyprus, and also a pilot program.
2 minutes, Mary.
Excuse me.
2 minutes, please.
Okay, so if we can move to the next 12, slide 12.
What is the situation?
Yes, what we actually did, and I want to talk about the achievements, what we have managed to do. The government now, because of this pressure, is talking with the European Union to introduce gender budgeting in all the ministries. And I think this is the most important improvement that we have. And also, the challenges that now let me see what else we did through it. So now for this year, we are preparing a proposal for tax because we feel there is a tax reform. So we are going to prepare a proposal to so that the tax that that the reform will take in consideration this the women's issue and gender budgeting. And we decided to hold a conference every February to check and evaluate what is happening every year in Cyprus, so that we know what the government is doing, so that we can continue to press. But there are a lot of we still have a lot of challenges. We need to do more. The government is not. We have to find a way to cooperate more closely with the government, because the government wants to do things at the moment, by themselves, and but we want to be more involved and see whether we can do more things together. And also we want to involve the media more, so that they can present our activities. And then we want to find funds in order to set up a professional a professional body who can do all the research for us, and many more. But I think I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I can ask. What I would like to finish by saying that in 1 year we did a lot of things. We raised awareness, we made the government start doing something. So we are really quite happy, although we don't have any substantial progress yet. In order to push even further, we continue with pilot programs so that we can push the government. One of the pilot programs that we are doing now is with the Office of the Auditor General, and we feel that this project will be used as a tool to push the government even further, because the auditor is prepared, has promised to use this knowledge in order to push ministry to ask more questions on the ministries, and in this way to make them do something more about gender budgeting. So I will stop here. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mary. And we are very, very happy that we've accompanied Fimonoi and the Cyprus Gender Budgeting Platform since November. And we've seen with our own eyes and like firsthand what you've been able to achieve and how much you've been trying to influence decision makers. And I think this is the challenge that came up in most contexts. It's how to kind of create a political will to implement gender responsive budgeting. So I don't know if Marianne, you want to take this question and answer it for the UK context, and then we can go one by one, and then we can probably go through the questions in the chat, and for the sake of time, we can close on time.
Sure. Thank you, Sama, and thank you everybody else for those really fascinating presentations. I learned so much, and it makes me feel quite depressed sometimes about the situation in the UK. I mean, one of the things I should say about the situation in the UK is it has changed over time. So where we are at the moment with a government that that really doesn't engage with gender responsive budgeting, there have been points where we've had governments that have made commitments to gender mainstreaming, of which, GRB been seen as a sort of form of, and where there have been specific analyses of some areas of expenditure. It's not been uniform. I think the issue with political will very much depends on the context and the country context, but also the context of who happens to be in power at any given time and what the priorities of that government are. So, for example, under the new Labour government after 1997, the then Chancellor, that's the sort of Chief Treasury Minister, Gordon Brown, had a very strong commitment to ending child poverty. And the Women's Budget Group were able to argue successfully that children aren't poor by themselves. Children are poor because their mothers are poor. And if you want to tackle child poverty, you need to look at women's poverty. And that requires you to think about how different policies affect women's access to the labour market, women's incomes, and so on. And there was some degree of success with that. Unfortunately, that sort of framing, which can work, is a bit of a double-edged sword, because it meant that the arguments were really made for women in their role as mothers rather than women in their own right as human beings. And I think, that's a weakness. So there's always that question of how much do you frame your arguments in a way that will fit with the grain of what the government wants to achieve. So you can make arguments about better effectiveness. You can say, look, this policy won't actually work in practice unless you consider the gendered impact of it. You could make arguments in terms of particular priorities that the government might have at that moment. But those priorities can change. Ultimately, I think, political will often comes about because people think that an issue is important. And one of the reasons why they think an issue is important is because people push for it and argue for it. So I think that sort of external pressure, not just from the people who want to carry out the work or who are really involved in GRB, but more broadly across, the women's sector and others, is really important. And the other thing is having allies who are parliamentarians, but not necessarily in government. So if you've got a period where you've got a government that's not desperately supportive, there are allies that can keep pushing the issue in Parliament, keep raising things, keep asking questions, keep putting down amendments and so on. And that's the route that we've been using over recent years, where we've had a government that hasn't been very committed to GRB.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you so much, Marianne. Olya, do you want to talk about this, knowing that Serbia is quite advanced in terms of influencing the government and having already a political will in implementing gender responsive budgeting at different levels?
Yes, I mean, we have a political will in the sense that Ministry of Finance is pushing, but what we see in implementation, especially at local level, this differs really. So there are municipalities, for example, that are really excelling in GRB, but I must say that most of them are actually lacking political will. So we see that through, you know, we engage with them in supporting GRB, doing capacity development, but we are also doing it with the MPs and councillors to secure that they who are adopting a budget in Parliament are aware of GRB. But when you see the adopted budget, you see that the gender equality is actually nowhere in some of the cases. And I think that this is why the state audit institution is really important, because they are monitoring the GRB or auditing the GRB implementation as part of their financial audit. So whenever they are auditing the financial audit of the municipality's budget, they are looking if they are complying with this, with the budget system law and the obligation to introduce GRB. So they are really pushing the processes. I think that if this was left to the political will at a local level on municipalities, there wouldn't be such a progress. So besides political will, I think that it's really important that there are these other actors who are key to securing that things actually get done. So it really differs from the governmental level to governmental level, but in case of the national level, we see that this is really there is a political will to introduce it. Although it is some years it is much stronger, some years it's not that much, and that's why I think our approach of doing it jointly with the coordination body for gender equality, which is the national gender equality mechanism, and the Ministry of Finance is also important, because we have two actors. So when one becomes shy, then the other one can take over. So this is actually how it works in our case. But I must say that we are experiencing like third elections in 4 years. So this is another challenge, that every time we don't know actually how things will evolve, but at least we have the firm legal obligation. So it is really important. We are missing these initial steps of doing gender analysis, but actually when we were discussing with the Ministry of Finance how to approach GRB implementation in Serbia, we were considering should we do the piloting, or should we start small with some ministries, do budget analysis and properly do GRB, but we realized that this is no go in Serbia's case. It depends on the state from the, context from different countries, but this is how it works here. So I think that the political will is key, but there needs to be these different actors that can really push from different angles, and the women's movement in Serbia is also very strong. So we are lucky to have these separate puzzles that come in together, but again, there is a lot of to be done. So in order to achieve the impact, so that's it from my side.
Yes, clearly it's like a very delicate balance to achieve, kind of like making gender responsive budgeting a sustainable approach that the government adopts at different levels. Mary, you talked about this a bit in your presentation, but if you have anything to add.
Yes, actually, I wanted to say something that it is very important to take in consideration elections. I think maybe one of the reasons that we succeeded so quickly is because before the elections of the president, we went and saw him and we made him commit, and even with a letter, not just commit verbally. We said, give us a letter that you're going to do this thing if you are elected. There were 3 candidates. The 2 candidates gave us letter, and the other candidate said he will think. That Mr. Christodoulidis was one of the candidates who said he was going to push for it. Now we have election, we have a municipal election. We are doing exactly the same thing. We are trying to get the mayor, the people who want to be elected as mayors to sign the same agreement. And we are actually, we have 2 of them who agreed. So we are glad that we are going to do something with them as well. So we have to take every opportunity that comes in front of us to push forward these things that we are doing, you know, for the in order to implement gender budgeting.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we've seen this in the conference that many of them make commitment, but you have to follow up with that in order to make it also sustainable. We have a question in the chat from our chair, Janet Veitch, who is asking Olya if there is a copy of the audit commission of the audit of the GRB in English.
Unfortunately, it's in Serbian, but with the IE, and I think that it's really not a limitation anymore. But actually, this audit was part of the regional parallel audit that 5 state audit institutions of the Western Balkans did. Ours is focused on GRB, and Montenegro's I also did the GRB performance audit. So this publication summarizing the audit reports of these 5 state audit institutions is available in English, and I can share it to you, Simon, so you can share with the group.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm wondering if there is anyone who wants to ask a question. Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask questions. For anything really, if you want to get in touch with one of the speakers / partners that we have. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Olya, Mary, and unfortunately, Michaela couldn't talk today and Darmi left. Thank you so much for making the time, and thank you for bearing with us all the technical issues. Hope to see you soon, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.